Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health.
Well, hello and happy Mental Health Monday, everyone. My name is Autumn, and I am one of your co-hosts, and we also have Kelsey here, who is one of your hosts.
Hello.
So this is episode number 6, and we're going to be talking about the mind-body connection. Before we jump straight into the podcast, I have a question that's kind of on theme with that Kelsey and I are going to answer. And so the question is, what is your favorite physical activity for stress relief?
All right. I guess I'll go first. I guess for me, I can't really narrow it down to just a sport, but sports has always been kind of that thing for me where I don't like running without a purpose. Like I need to be chasing a ball or something, I guess. Maybe I'm more...
Or running from zombies.
Yeah. Like I'm more of a golden retriever than just like one of those greyhounds. You know, I have to chase a ball. But yeah. I also, a close second for me would be walking and or hiking. I love being able to... be in nature, walk my dog, although sometimes that increases the stress, but for the most part, it's helpful. But yeah, something about that has always been kind of a helpful reset for me and sometimes helped me feel like I could get a deep breath in where before I kind of exerted that, I wasn't able to breathe as deeply. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The idea of being able to breathe more deeply, exercise and like moving your body just helps you do that better. I think for me, so I am one of those weirdos where I actually do really enjoy running. It is
good for you.
It's one of those things. I remember I was a junior in college, and it was the first time that I had ever tried to go for a run. And I mean, I made it maybe like, I don't know, a couple steps, something like that. And I came back in. And the way that I looked like I was dying, my friend Rachel and my friend Kyla at the time, they were like, are you okay? And I looked at them and I was like, I feel like my soul just left my body. And if I ever try to do that again, I need you to stop me. And so who would have thought, what was it? 5 years later in therapy, my therapist, tells me to give some sort of running a try in order to like get me moving and going, especially because it was during the stay-at-home order, so people were just home a lot. And I gave it a shot again, and when I tell you, it was night and day difference. And ever since then, I have found so much solace and peace in running. So that's one of my favorite things. And then the other thing that I do pretty consistently is hot yoga, which I know people are also like, wow, you're the weirdo. But yes, I also love hot yoga. So yeah.
Nice. All right. So before we get truly started, I had another story to tell here too. So I noticed, the first few episodes that my co-host had such beautiful backgrounds, and like you can even see Autumn's today, like she's got some art back there, and the other episode she had her guitar back there, and Wes has some nice plants in his background. I know for those of you who are just listening and not on YouTube, you can't see it, but I was just feeling a little FOMO or something. I was like, all right, I got to get something to put on the walls behind me because it just looked too blank. And so I got this shelf, but I had this plant, but then I had kind of like this blank space and I wasn't sure what to put in it. So today I went to a store and I got this little, I don't know what you call it. It's not a statue, figurine. I don't really know how, but it's, you can kind of see, I feel like a grandma right now trying to fit something in the frame, but which Autumn can attest, I'm a grandma when it comes to technology. But anyway, but yeah, so Hope. So I was carrying this around with me, right? And I had a little bit too much stuff in my hands and I dropped it and it shattered. Like, I mean, it broke into like a lot of pieces. And that, of course, it was right in front of one of the clerks too. And he was like, "Ooh, why didn't you have a cart?" And I was like, "Well, you know." But I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is like kind of trying not to think of the symbolism here. Like hope just shattered on the ground. Like this is not good. So I had to go find another hope to try and put on my shelf. And then when I was adjusting it, I dropped it. So this one didn't break into a million pieces, but in some ways it might just be even more poetic because now for all our Midwesterners, we've got ope. So, and I'm just going to say, Autumn and I have already had so many technical difficulties today. So it has just been an ope day. This is just, it's on brand. But yeah.
Yeah. You were like, when it broke the second while you were on camera, you were like, oh no, this might be a good sign. And then we just started having all these technical difficulties.
Like
It's just like,
100% my
yeah,
fault. Yeah.
it's, I just feel like it's an ope day, you
It's an
know?
ope
And
day.
I'm going to start looking at life like that because when I look at things, it's like, oh, it's a bad day. Like, oh, that's a bad day. But if it's an ope day, there's something quirky about it where it's like,
Yes, yes.
here it goes. You know, like I'm in a sitcom and it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah. You have your hopeful days and you have your opeful
Your
days.
hopeful
You
days.
know, yeah.
I'm hearing another t-shirt design right now.
Oh man, me too, for sure. All right. Well, should we get to our actual topic and see if we can make it through this hopeful day that we've had?
Let's do it.
All right. So, yes, today we are talking about the mind-body connection. And I think, I don't know, I don't think it was until fairly recently that I started to think about some of the connections between mental health and physical health. And not even just from a health standpoint, but even just like from a how you experience your mental health can be such a physical experience. And I think, I shared in my story a little bit of when I look back, the first signs that I was kind of aware of that I had something going on were pretty physical, especially like I told you, I was big old Tums girly over here. I always had my rattled wherever I went because I had a bottle of Tums in my pocket. But
That's so funny.
but I think, as I've talked with some more people and heard more, I hear sometimes there seem to be this disconnect in understanding between, well, this can't be a mental health issue because I'm experiencing it physically. And so, I just felt like it was a good thing for us to kind of discuss and get into a little bit on this podcast. So, yeah.
Yeah, let's dive right in.
Yeah. All right. So, the first kind of clinical term that I want to talk about for the sake of breaking it down a little bit. So, one of the ways that they kind of describe this physical experience of mental health is this word psychosomatic, which sounds very clinical. It sounds scary. Anytime, I don't know, I feel like anytime any words got psycho in it, you automatically are like, oh boy, where are we going with this? But, so psychosomatic is the physical illness or other condition caused or aggravated by a mental factor such as internal conflict or stress. And that was from the Oxford Dictionary. So, yeah, it's the two words, obviously. Psycho is in terms of with your mind, not how some of the connotations around psycho. And then somatic is the way of saying, the physical experience. So a psychosomatic symptom. So, yeah.
Yeah, the only, I wonder if like some of our listeners, especially some of our younger listeners, if they may be able to like understand what I'm talking about. But there's this show on Netflix called Never Have I Ever. And there is a girl, Davy, who essentially she loses her dad while she's like in the middle of a concert. And so the first season, you kind of learn that Davy spent, I think, an entire summer, maybe an entire school year, I can't remember specifically, in a wheelchair. Physically, like the doctors were like, there's nothing wrong with her. But the term psychosomatic is actually used multiple times in those episodes because the shock and the grief that she went through of losing her dad so suddenly and so publicly did something to her mind that impacted her body. So that's like, I think that's like one of the first times I've heard that word used in like a pop culture.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And there is an understanding too of where it's physical symptoms that are usually without any other medical explanation or diagnosis. That's according to Cleveland Clinic. But yeah, so like there are people they'll go to their doctor over and over again for this physical symptom, and their doctor says, we can't really find any physical explanation for why you're experiencing these symptoms. But it's not because they're not real. They're very real, but a lot of times they can stem from a mental health reason. Some of this we got into a little bit in our stress episode, but there is a physical experience that we have, or a flooding of hormones and all that kind of stuff that can play a big part into this. But yeah, when our bodies are going through distress, they release, cortisol and adrenaline among a bunch of other hormones. And those things are helpful if you are in an actual life or death situation. But when that system kind of gets stuck on, or it keeps reacting to things that are maybe not actually life-threatening, but that your body or your mind, I guess, is perceiving as threatening, then that system can kind of get stuck on. And so when it gets stuck on and you have these hormones that are just consistently being shot out in your body, it has physical ramifications or physical manifestations of how you can experience that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's honestly just so fascinating to think of how our brains decide like what is worthy of that response. Because it's like, obviously, if I end up in a car accident, right? I was in a car accident a couple of years ago, and my adrenaline was through the roof. My entire body was shaking. And I can think of other times where I've had the exact same experience. There wasn't a car accident. It's like having these very physical aspects related to a situation that isn't life or death. And it's, we talked about it last episode, I believe, just about how, or not last episode, I think it's the All Things Mental Health episode of like how trauma kind of informs how we react to things, and so it may not be as big as a car accident, externally, but internally it is. So,
yeah. So I'm just gonna go through it. I'm gonna list a bunch of symptoms that can be connected with anxiety, whether it's stress, whether it's depression, whether it's other kind of mental health diagnoses or whatever you want to call them. I'm just gonna read this list right now. So first up, there is definitely a big connection between the mind and your gut. There's a lot of gastrointestinal distress that can be very much linked to bro, you can't.
All right, y'all, I'm so sorry. The reason why I'm laughing is because I was literally just talking about this with Kelsey before we started recording, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to tell him, but I think I'm going to tell him, just to be completely real with y'all, because this is an authentic podcast, and I want you to know you're not alone. One of the biggest ways that my anxiety manifests for me is I get, what's a better word than explosive? I get very urgent, not kidding around diarrhea.
Yep.
So that's why I was laughing.
To make Autumn feel better, me too. Yep. So this is very much. So anyway, we have nausea and vomiting. There can be heartburn. There can be diarrhea. It can even lead to inflammatory bowel disease. There can be definite big fluctuations in appetite changes. It can kind of go one way or the other. You can have very much increased appetite, but you can also have a very highly reduced appetite. And I've experienced both on both extremes. Um, there's even been some showing of linkage between acid reflux and anxiety, and even, as bad as ulcers. So that's, I mean, that probably doesn't even cover all of the different, but there's definitely a huge connection between the mind and the stomach. Um, it's very visceral. Yeah.
So yeah, something that I've had personal experience with is both fatigue and insomnia. Um, and if you've ever experienced depression, um, or even anxiety, because it's so like high functioning that it's exhausting on your body. It's very easy to just be tired. Yeah, fatigue and insomnia is something that I've had personal experience with. Um, if you've ever had a depressive episode, or if you are diagnosed with depression, and even anxiety, just the way that it manifests, because it's so um, like hyper functioning, it's kind of exhausting on your body, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so then you're fatigued and you're tired throughout the day, but then insomnia comes along and it doesn't help the process,
No.
because even though you're super exhausted, you can't sleep, or you can't sleep well. Um, and so yeah, that's another way that that can your mental and physical health are kind of connected. And I found a statistic that honestly wasn't shocking to me at all, but I felt it could be good to share. It says around 50 to 80% of people with mental health conditions will also have sleeping problems. Um, I think there's maybe some merit in, asking the chicken and the egg, like which one came first.
Yeah.
I don't have that answer. I'm not specialized in that field, but it is interesting to think about.
Yeah. So, a few other ways that there are some of the other psychosomatic symptoms that are common amongst people who have some mental health struggles. Um, there's hypertension, chest pain. I've personally experienced that, where I think I just was so tense and not breathing deeply enough that I just, like, literally I had such bad chest pain. It was scary. But yep, there's chest pain, there's back pain, there's irregular heartbeat, headaches, backaches, sleep problems, muscle tension, chronic joint pain, restlessness, suppressed immune system, shaking, sweating, trouble breathing. It really just, there's a lot of ways in which your mental health physically can affect you. And so, yeah, another statistic Autumn found for us is that schizophrenia has also been linked to a higher risk of heart and respiratory diseases. And I mean, that's the reality of it is mental health, it hurts, it affects you, and it has very much physical implications. So, yeah.
Yeah, the kind of like the bare point that we're trying to get across is, if you, in any way, shape, or form, don't believe that your body and your mind are connected, hear us out, because it's true. It just is. It very
Yep.
much so is. Um, I remember, I don't know if this is something we'll talk about later, but I remember one time I was at an event with a bunch of my friends, and one of my guy friends came up to me. He was like, "My chest hurts really, really bad." And immediately I got worried, because he's young, but like, I didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Okay, tell me a little bit more about your symptoms." He's like, "Yeah, my chest hurts. I can't really breathe super well. Feel just like very overwhelmed and anxious." And I was like, "Have you ever had a panic attack before?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "I'm not a doctor." So, like, no joke. I was like, "I'm not a doctor. So, like, maybe make sure you ask someone else if you're actually having a heart attack."
Yeah.
um, but it sounds like you're having a panic attack to me. And so it's very possible for you to experience physical symptoms without you even being aware that it has any attachment to what's going on with you mentally or psychologically. But it is a thing, right? My friend was not having a heart attack, he was having a panic attack. And the physical symptoms were obvious to him before the mental ones were. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a real thing.
It's very common for people the first couple of times that they have panic attacks to go to the hospital because they think they're having heart attacks. And
Yep.
I think that goes to show too, like the physical symptoms aren't more mild because they're just in your head. Like they're just as painful as if there was a physical cause for it.
Yeah.
Like if somebody is, experiencing such physical turmoil that they go to the hospital because of a heart attack, that goes to show you this is very real. This is a
Yeah.
very real physical feeling that people are dealing with. So, yeah. There's, some good news and some bad news to the mind-body connection. Obviously, what we just read probably sounds like a lot of bad news. Like, oh my gosh, like that's a lot of terrible symptoms. Like that's not great. um, but there are some ways in which you can use it to your advantage. And there are, I think, just ways to. I did not actually have an ending for that thought.
Yeah, I think I kind of get what you're saying. The idea of being aware that your mind and your body have a connection. You can work both to try and achieve health. So that's the upside, right?
Yes.
There's multiple avenues that you have. That, yes, it is unfortunate that they both impact each other, but it's also fortunate that they do because if you
Mm-hmm.
do right by both, then you are more likely to be holistically healthy.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Great way of bringing my thoughts together.
For sure.
So obviously, there are ways that the mind can affect the body, which we've kind of talked about, but there's also ways that the body can affect the mind. And some of the ways that can look a little less helpful, obviously, I think anytime that you're experiencing some level of unhealth physically, it is stressful, which can then make it difficult to keep some of those negative thought patterns at bay, or just those physical illness can be stressful, which can be difficult on your mental health. But there are also some things that physically can kind of set you up in a less helpful place as you're in your pursuit of mental health.
Yeah.
Some of those are poor sleeping habits, and Autumn's kind of covered that a little bit. And it, like she said, it's tricky because which comes first? How do you go to sleep if you're anxious, but then how do you get over your anxiety if you're having trouble sleeping? But don't worry, later on in this season, we will be having an entire episode on insomnia. Just for me personally, but
Oh,
yeah. But there are also certain habits that you can do that can help promote you having a better chance of getting a good night's sleep. There are certain things that you can eat or drink that are not helpful for your mental health. Like I know for me, if I am feeling anxious, I cannot do coffee. I can do decaf, but like any sort of anxiety, caffeine and me are not friends. And honestly, even sometimes when I think I'm in a good mental place and I drink a cup of coffee, you've seen some of those memes on Instagram, I'm sure, that are kind of like, oh, am I gonna feel more awake or am I gonna feel like I'm dying? Like this is like I always somewhat feel like every cup of coffee can be a little bit of a game of roulette for me, you know. But drugs and
yeah.
alcohol can also very much negatively affect your mental health as well. Even things such as poor body language. If you kind of go into that mental space and you kind of let your body follow suit, sometimes that can lead to, if you have body language that says you are feeling hopeless, then it doesn't help you feel less hopeless, some of those kinds of things. And it can even be, poor hygiene can contribute to a worse mental state. But
Yeah, and all of these,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, all of these are, it's hard because definitely don't hear what we're not saying when 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 we're encouraging or discouraging these habits. We are also aware that mental health takes or mental illness takes some amount of autonomy out of ourselves, and so we're not going for a pick yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality of like you start
Yeah, no.
showering every day and making sure you're eating good and stop drinking alcohol, you'll never be depressed again. We're just
Right.
kind of pointing out some main things that can be contributing to your mental state, or at the very least, most likely aren't helping.
Yeah. Just certain choices that you can make that can, even though they seem like they are physical choices, can have mental health implications or vice versa.
Yeah.
And talking too about some of the ways that you mentally can do some things that increase physical health struggles. We've already kind of covered some of the symptoms, but in terms of like conscious decisions, because I can promise you, like in the times that I've experienced my anxiety really physically, it was not because I was like, I would really like to have some chest pain today. Like, it's not like I wanted that. But there are certain choices that you can make, or I guess some unhealthy habits that might need some breaking in order to see a bettering of your physical health.
Yeah.
But negative self-talk can absolutely lead to destructive behavior, or even just, your how you speak to yourself or how you think about things is part of that stress response in a lot of ways. And so some of that can play into it. And then fixation on sad or negative things can absolutely, obviously it has all sorts of implications, but it can affect even, your motivation to exercise or shower, or some of those types of things that can lead to some negative physical health issues.
Yeah.
So that was the bad news. Now we're going to look at the better news of things that you can do physically and mentally to just improve your health overall. So just like that connection can sometimes feel like it's snowballing because they play hand in hand and it gets worse and, feels like it's getting worse and worse. But the good news is that that connection also can work and be there on the other side of things, where you can make physical choices and mental health choices that improve both of those things too. So
Yeah. So on a positive note, with the connection between our mind and our bodies, there are physical things that we can do in order to promote mental well-being. And some of those things, one of those things is exercising. And I know, like, when people hear this, it's just like this collective groan of like, exercise, and you get this vision of like someone who's like on their last leg trying to run a block, or someone who's at Planet Fitness hating their life. And honestly, my encouragement to you is to find something that makes you happy. Like I said, I do hot yoga. A lot of you probably would be like, that make me very unhappy. But I do dance class. I remember a friend was telling me how she is really, really bad at hip hop dancing. She's really, really bad at hip hop dancing, but she loves it. And so she tried that. And so it's really just a matter of what is going to help you move your body consistently. And there's just so many different options. So I would encourage you just to check those out and not hear the word exercise and immediately shut that down, because exercise is really, really good for your mental health.
And your physical health. Like, it's just, yeah.
Facts.
Yeah.
I forget about that
Right.
sometimes. And it's cool. It's cool, the fact that we can say that, because we have found things that we enjoy doing. So it's not so much about like, oh, we're trying to be physically healthy. It's like, this brings us joy in our brain,
Yeah.
So I believe that exists out there for everyone, that there is something that you can do to move your body that will make you happy.
Yes.
And then will also make your body happy.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Win-win. Yep.
Win-win. The next one that I feel, what's the word? Hypocritically strong about is sleep. Like, as I've done more and more research in like my academic life in mental health, sleep is really important, like way more important than I would have ever thought. And I even thought it was important. So it's even more important than that. I think I mentioned this on a podcast or two before, but I was in an inpatient psychiatric facility. And amongst all of the other really helpful things that they did, they had a very strict sleep, like nighttime and wake up. And it wasn't so strict to like you weren't allowed to do anything. It's just all TVs are off. You can't play with any of the like video games or anything like that. So you're just going to go into the den and read. That's pretty much it. Um, and the reason why they do that is to protect your circadian rhythm, which is that like internal alarm clock that functions off of like night and day. And there was a statistic, and I don't know if I wrote it down. Um, I didn't because I'm a weenie, but there's a statistic out here somewhere about how many people with mental, or I think we may have actually already said it, how many people like with mental disorders also have some sort of sleeping disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very connected. And so having a healthy sleep and wake schedule is really, really important, because it's been linked to like depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, even eating disorders, schizophrenia, like the whole 9 yards. Um, so yeah, and then the other thing I was talking about was like good hygiene. That's important. Um, there's a note that I make at some point where, oh, I was talking about eating well. Eating well is also really, really important. All these things that I am saying, and I'm sure Kelsey has more to add, all these ones that I'm talking about, I want to like put a caveat out there that again, a lot of these things are tricky because mental health really just takes away so much of your autonomy, your ability to do things. And so I don't want anyone to hear like, oh, Autumn's telling me to eat well, but my mental disorder is that I have disordered eating patterns. That's and so it's just a matter of like doing what you can, if you have a therapist, talking with your therapist, and just figuring out what are some ways that you can incorporate healthy rhythms into your life, healthy physical rhythms into your life in order to kind of bless you mentally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the things that's been interesting for me is it's been helpful for me to pay attention to my body when I'm going through a stressful kind of situation, because that can be a lot of times the first place that I start to experience my stress or experience my anxiety is physical. And so, even actually today, I was driving and I was getting ready to pull out of a busy intersection, and there was no light, and it was turning left across multiple lanes, and could feel myself getting stressed. And I realized, oh, okay, I'm getting stressed. Like, okay, oh, I'm getting stressed, and realized that I had to take a second, release some of that tension, take a deep breath, and then I was like, okay, I don't need to be that stressed about this. Traffic will clear at some point. Nobody is being, I don't need to feel in a rush, kind of a thing. And so I think that awareness of your body and, some of the stuff we talked about, stuff like headaches and muscle tension and joint pain, obviously part of your physical response to stress is you just get tightened up, or, different people respond in different ways. But for me, understanding the physical piece of that also can be that first indicator of, oh, I can feel my jaw getting tense. I got to let go, physically relax, and then my mind follows suit. And so, some of those ways that something as simple as unclenching your jaw can help your mental well-being, So just that connection is such an interesting piece because it has all sorts of implications. So even I didn't look this up, and I probably should have, but I know I've read from different places that simply smiling can just kind of boost your mood for a second. Even if you don't feel like smiling, even if you're feeling like grumpy cat, just taking 10 seconds to just smile releases endorphins and can help improve your mental state. And then discussing too a little bit of, like I said, we've covered some of this in the stress, and there is overlap here. But one of the biggest ways that you can kind of improve your physical health or relieve some of the physical symptoms you might be experiencing from your mental health is relaxation techniques, deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation and guided imagery, or even things like coloring and drawing and activating your five senses and those kinds of things. Anything that you can do to shift from that sympathetic nervous system and bring the parasympathetic nervous system in instead, that can help drain those, not drain, I physically don't exactly know how it works, but those things that help you relax, help take some of those effects of the cortisol and the adrenaline and whatever it is that's just coursing through your veins, kind of turning that off, turning the hose off before it gets flooded, but then just kind of, I'm sure it releases different kinds of hormones that help you to be relaxed. And, you know, there's a certain level of which when your body is heightened, it literally, it can't think rationally always, because your brain is, you know, that the reason those things go on is so that you turn off the rational part of your brain so you can act in a life-threatening situation. But that's not helpful when you're not in an actual life-threatening situation. So if you can turn that off so that rational brain gets a chance to get a word in edgewise, you know, I've definitely had times where my thoughts were just racing and it was really difficult. But then when I just took that second, or, you know, did that 10-minute deep breathing exercise, all of a sudden I was like, okay, I can change my mind pattern on this. And it helped both the physical symptoms that I was having, but also improve my mental state as well.
Yeah, that's so good. Deep breathing is super underrated. I do it like the older I get and the longer that I've been in therapy and just realizing how beneficial it actually is. You will catch me making the most like obnoxious deep breathing, like inhale, exhale sounds, like in the grocery store, when I'm at the ATM, if I'm walking my dogs, like I don't even care, because deep breathing, it just kind of resets something in your body. And all these like techniques that you're talking about, Kels, it really helps to bring you back into a present moment, you know, whether it's like breathing, looking at the, you know, acknowledging your five senses, yada, yada, yada. And with that, it helps you realize that the way your nervous system responded was unnecessary. It's like, oh, I am sitting in my dining room in my home next to my dogs. I can smell the cooking that I'm making for dinner, and you know, all of these different things. And so you're essentially letting your nervous system know, hey, it's okay, calm down, we're good, no need to pop off anymore, we're safe. And so that's why, even though some of this stuff might sound silly to some people, especially if you've never, you know, really heard it before, it actually is really, really helpful, because your brain is perceiving a reality that just isn't there. And now it's your opportunity to let your brain know what reality actually is. Safe.
Yes.
Autonomy, all these different things.
Right. So to kind of wrap things up and why I felt this episode was important, I think there's just been some people in my life who are experiencing some of these physical symptoms, and they're willing to admit that they're experiencing these physical symptoms, but they do not want to entertain the idea that there could be mental health implications, or we have this idea that it is mental only affects mental and physical only affects physical. And so if you're experiencing a physical symptom, that's it, that's cut and dry. But there is absolutely a connection. I mean, we are holistic beings. All of the different pieces of ourselves play into each other. And so, you know, to gently say, you might be prolonging your physical suffering because you are not addressing your mental health. And, you know, obviously I think for some people, they want it to be a physical cause, because that, you know, that's objective, right? We kind of talked about that in previous episodes, where this thing that I'm experiencing, if it's an objective problem and they can give me a pill, or they can give me that I have strep throat and they can give me an antibiotic, we're good to go, I don't have to experience anymore. That feels safer to some people. Whereas if, you know, it's coming from a mental health place, they might feel, well, that's subjective and that's scary to me because that doesn't seem to have a cut and dry answer. And so you feel hopeless within that. And so to kind of push against that mentality, but also to say, you're not stuck in your suffering. There's a beauty to this connection as well, because like we just said, there are things you can do with your mental health to help you improve these physical symptoms. And so just because it's not necessarily a black and white cure to what you are physically experiencing doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can do to relieve those symptoms or see improvement in those areas. And I think too, the other piece, as we talk about, this podcast is not just for people who have mental health issues, but also for friends of people who have mental health issues. It's very important that you understand that just because it's a psychosomatic symptom or just because it's stemming from a mental health place does not mean it is not real. And it does not mean that it is not painful. I think sometimes we associate, well, you've just got a stomachache because you're anxious, so stop feeling anxious, kind of thing. It's very real, and it can be difficult to pinpoint sometimes where it's stemming from. And so just because doesn't have a physical explanation for the physical pain, it does not make the pain any less real. So
it's a good word. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts, Autumn?
You can edit this out if it ends up sounding like cockapoo, but I think if there's any skeptics that are out there that are listening, still haven't been convinced, that mind body is very much so connected. I think a really simple, like neutral, non-polarizing way to think about this, example that I can give is jet lag. So everybody knows jet lag. You're flying and like you get to a place and your internal clock is off because maybe you've flown into a new time zone or flown back into your old time zone, or you've been flying all over the place into different time zones, whatever it may be. And so your sleep schedule is just it's just not good, which means your circadian rhythm is off, that fun word that I brought up before. And if you've ever experienced jet lag, I don't know about you, but personally, when I've experienced it and when I've witnessed other people experience it, no one is super happy and cheery and like ready to go with the day. They're grumpy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have a poor appetite. And so I say this to kind of bring back to a point where it's not as specific as mental health, but something like your circadian rhythm being messed up or, poor sleep patterns can lead to things like you being grumpy and being unhappy and unmotivated, and all of these different things. And so if that can be the case with jet lag, all these other things most certainly can be true as well. So
yeah,
that's my penny for my thought. Take it or not.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. All right, so before we totally wrap it up, we have our ending question for you, our listeners. So our ending kind of reflection exercise or question for this week is to take some time this week and to notice, where do you physically experience stress, or where is one of the first places that you notice it? Like I said before, kind of having a little bit more of awareness of where I do experience my anxiety or my stress in my body has been helpful for me, because sometimes I can catch it before we go full-blown fight or flight, And so yeah, that's your challenge for this week, is to, think about that. Think about where you physically might be experiencing some of your distress or some of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
That's a good one.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this OPE Day. Autumn, we officially made it.
We made it.
For those of you out there listening to this nice, clean, polished Spotify version, I promise you it did not go that smoothly. So, but
we hope that you all have an hopeful day.
Hopeful. All right. Bye, everybody.